Welcome to the paper cutout in Adobe Illustrator. Today we're going to be getting into creating out a paper cutout in which you see a number of different layers stacked on top of each other. It gives the sense that paper is stacked on top of each other, but we're going to be doing this digitally through Adobe Illustrator. You can see the example that we're going to be using today, creating out the sense of a pumpkin, where we can see inside of the pumpkin layers, where as it recedes further back, it gets darker and darker, and then also adds a number of different elements to create interest throughout the different layers. With this design, we're going to be using a basic template. Starts out with just a flat outline, using outlines within the sections, as well as we can see the shapes on the outsides. We won't use every shape, but with this, the idea is that we can compile different shapes and look to create a whole composition with this paper cutout effect. To start out with, I want to select out all the layers that make up my pumpkin. I can use the move tool, click and drag over top of all the pieces so that I select out the areas in which we are going to start separating out the area. To do this, I'm going to go over to my shape builder tool, left side navigation. And before I do begin, I do want to eliminate out change the foreground color from white to any color, just so we can get a different variation. So I'll just start out with a lighter color that we will not use in the design later on. But with all the layers selected that make up the pumpkin, I'm going to go one by one from the outside going in. Clicking on the pieces, I can start from the outside, clicking in, and what this is going to do is separate them for later on when we apply in some gradient effects. One thing you can consider doing is going from the inside out, and this will help with creating out the drop shadows and arranging the layers in a little bit more easy fashion. But when I do separate these out, I don't want to have this drop shadow or this outline separating out the sections. But we can get into coloring this, whether it's using the gradient tool in the left side navigation. What I'm going to look to do is, now that I've clicked on each piece, I'm going to click back on my selection tool, click off of it, and get into manipulating out the colors. You can see from my example up in the top left, I start with the outside, where it starts with a darker gray to black. To change this out, I am going to use gradient, so it is a little bit easier to see. If you do want to start with flat colors, you can just start out with flat colors that help give the sense of what our arrangement of colors are going to be, going from this dark exterior and then doing lighter variations of orange that get darker and darker as it goes into each layer. So if I wanted to separate this out right now, with my foreground color, I am going to eliminate out all the strokes eventually through the process, but just selecting on the outside piece, I'm just going to start out going over to my swatches panel. I'll pull my swatches outside so we can see it better. Just starting out with a dark gray. Then I'll go the next layer in. I'm going to pick out a light orange color, and each layer again going into a darker variation of orange. But we are going to want to have separation between these that have a smooth transition. So we do not want to have this black stroke on it. If you do see a black stroke, just go over to your layer, left side navigation, click on the stroke panel, and eliminate out the stroke. You do this with each layer as we go forward. But for my foreground, the next layer, we're just going in again to the next level of orange. Finally, with this distance color, I could look to change it up. If I run out of colors, I can go a darker color variation of red. I can always go over to my color palette and just drop it so it is a darker variation. But again, make sure to eliminate out the strokes so that they don't become a distraction. And I'm not going into anything pure black because I do want to see the separations with drop shadows. As we can see now, we have separations with different levels of this color. But we're going to want to get into adding a drop shadow to see the separation really happen. What I'm going to do is select over from the outside with the selection tool, clicking and dragging over all the pieces that make up these levels. I can go up to Effects at the top navigation, Stylize in the Illustrator Effects section, and Drop Shadow. With my drop shadow settings, I've set it up to 75% opacity. My X offset is 0.04. My Y offset is 0. And then my blur is 0.09. Keeping it to a black for right now. And click OK. So right now, what we can see that the layers are currently showing that the middle layer is on the top. If I want to have this appear on the opposite direction, in which we want to have the shadows in the inside appearing in the distance, we actually have to move these layers backwards. To move these layers backwards, we can either hit Command or Control left bracket. When I hit left bracket, it shifts this layer now behind the layer that's on the outside of it. I can hold down Shift, select on now both layers, and again hit Control or Command left bracket, and it drops down that layer to the next level. I'm going to repeat this process, selecting on each layer as I go forward, the next layer out. Select on it, hold down Command or Control, click left bracket, it sends that layer backwards. We want to get to the outside so that the outer area appears outside of these pieces. One panel that is going to be essential for working with paper cutout is our appearance panel. Over on the right side navigation, we are looking for the little white circle with the dotted circle appearing around it. This is known as our appearance panel. If you do not see the appearance panel, like any window that you need to find, I go up to Window in the top navigation. In alphabetical order, I can find the tool that we need or the window that we need. But the appearance panel will be essential in how to modify or change settings that we create for our image. Right now, if I take a look, I'm going to select over all the layers that we just used to create out the drop shadow effect for these layers. And in the appearance panel, I can see the drop shadow that I've applied onto the object. If I want to hide my drop shadow, whether it's one single layer or all the layers when selected together, I can click on the eye icon to make them disappear so I can focus on simpler elements that I may need to apply onto an object. Taking a look right now, when I hide this, it permits me to be able to select on layers a little bit easier. If I do have all the layers with the drop shadow on them, it can be trickier to be able to select on a single layer because the drop shadow overlaps some of the other layers. So just be aware that you can control hiding out your drop shadow at any point just within the appearance panel. But the reason why I may hide my appearance panel if I wanted to add in elements to these layers. So I'm going to hide out from my drop shadow for a moment. I'm actually going to look to use a couple of these tree elements over onto some of these layers and combine them on to make it a more interesting graphic overall. So what I'm going to look to do is select on the outside yellow circle or yellow orange part of the pumpkin and select on this piece of the tree. Holding down Shift, I can select so I have both of them selected. The reason why I'm selecting this, I'm going to look to combine them into one. Because I have only those two pieces selected, I can use the shape builder to help combine these pieces into one. If I take my time with it, there are certain elements I want to make sure that I do go overlapping into. Using the shape builder, I'm just connecting into these little small branches so that they become part of the same layer. Do this on the bottom as well. But now when I have it all connected, it becomes part of this shape. So if I were looking at possibly the drop shadow that I recently applied, when I reapply it, you see that the drop shadow now applies onto this object as well. I can do this for the next layer as well. If I wanted to add a tree onto the darker orange color that I have sitting behind this, I can take the tree from the other side. And I'm just looking to make sure that it overlaps on certain aspects of the tree, and I can always resize or scale the tree as needed to make sure that they do overlap in certain sections. As long as I have it overlapping in a couple areas, what I'm going to do, select on the outside part of the pumpkin, hold down Shift, select on the tree, and then click on the shape builder to be able to get into combining them into one piece. Down towards the bottom, click and drag through. Then over on the smaller areas, you can always zoom in, Command or Control plus. I'm going to look to combine these into one single piece. So when I click off of it, now we can see that this is combined. If I do have any straggling pieces, I can always select them, hit backspace, delete them out. But the idea of this is that when, again, I go over my appearance panel and reveal that drop shadow, it now has the drop shadow appearing onto that specific layer. We're going to do this again for our inside red area to bring in this mansion image. Select out both pieces. Click on the shape builder. Look to combine from the bottom outward. If you are getting it where it shows a different color, remember you can always change the color of the shape builder before you do start to combine them into one shape. So if I wanted to have it a lighter color, you see how it adds that pink color in. But for myself, I do want this darker red that I already currently have. I can select on that area, click on the shape builder tool. Actually make sure to select on the object first. But because I last selected on this dark red area, when I click on the shape builder, I see it here and I can combine these pieces into one. So again, if I were looking to test out the drop shadow, make sure it worked, you can see how the drop shadow now applies onto the object in the background. Get that darker rim around the area, makes it a lot more interesting. I'm also going to drop my moon shape down towards this area. And if I want to move an object backward, I can hit Control left bracket. I can keep tapping left bracket until it gets behind the layers that I'm looking to get it behind. I can scale it down if need be, if I want to rescale it, or rotate it a little bit. Depends on what your interest is or how you want it to look. But again, I can always get rid of the drop shadow or get rid of the stroke on the object or change this color if I want to have something that has more of a gradient effect as we're about to get into gradients. But again, I can always hide out my drop shadow for a layer. Just select on the layer, hide the drop shadow, and I can look to apply these drop shadows on a little bit later when I have it for all the rest of the pieces. So again, just clicking on the eye icon gets rid of the drop shadow in the appearance panel. I'm just currently tweaking the outside edges of my paper size to make sure it reaches all the way out to the edge of the document. Just me finding little minor things that need adjusting. But we can see how now I have the house in the background, the moon behind that, this one tree over on the right, the other tree on the left. I'm also going to add in this spider hanging down from the outside exterior area. Because the outside exterior area is this gray area, it will go well with having the spider as part of this image. If I want to scale it down or make it smaller a little bit so it doesn't take attention away from the mansion, I can do that. But what I'm going to do is select on the outside where the gray is, hold down shift to select on the spider, then I can zoom in. I'm going to use the shape loader again to combine these pieces, being careful not to select on the yellow area. I'm going to select through, and we can see how the now spider has the same color and is now part of the same layer as our outside of the pumpkin. So next we're going to get into adding in gradients, make this a little bit more interesting. Right now I have a flat gray for the outside exterior. I am going to need my gradient panel on the left side or the right side navigation. Currently it's set up for black and white, the default color settings, but I do have a light gray or dark gray that I do plan to use. What I can do is either pull it from the swatches. I can click and drag a color right onto the gradient panel. I'm going to get rid of this white, click and drag a color downward off of the palette to replace it out. I don't want to have a full black color, just because when we are dealing with the drop shadows, we want to have separation of colors. So I'm just going to get a dark gray color right next to the black 90% K. And if I want to adjust the gradient and how it travels, I can click on the gradient tool on the left side and adjust the direction that the gradient travels. So once I have the exterior, I'm going to select on the outside piece of the gradient of the pumpkin. This orange exterior, it's a light orange. What I'm going to do is click and drag this onto my gradient panel. And I don't want to have this color, this gray color over on the right side of the panel, so I'm going to look to eliminate it out. And if I want to add in a color, I can select on an open area to add in another sample of this orange color. But what I'm actually going to look to do is darken one side of this up. I can double click on the color and adjust my M to get a little bit more vibrant, or I could adjust the K to get a little bit darker overall. For myself right now, I'm just going to adjust the M to get a little bit darker. And again, I can always use the gradient tool on the left side to adjust the gradient and how it's going to travel on top of your object. So with the gradient tool selected, I click and drag, and you can see how it's affecting the lighter side on the top. Or if I want to reverse it, I can have the darker side on the top. But really, there's not enough separation just yet, so I'm going to move the magenta color up a little bit more to get a little bit more orange, and the yellow or Y up a little bit more to get less pink on the color. So again, I can always adjust the gradient as needed. For myself, I'm going to have the lighter colors towards the bottom right. And I'll explain why in a little bit. Once I have this color gets very close to the color behind it. So this means the color behind it has to get a little bit darker too. And each layer, as we start to add in colors or add in these gradients are going to get a little bit darker each time. So the next tree and the next layer, I'm going to use the darker orange color, click and drag it onto the bar. And again, if I want the darker color, I can click and drag it towards the top left. But right now it's blending in too much with the color on the outside. So again, I'm going to have to darken up this lighter orange, pulling up the magenta, pulling up the yellow. I can get that darker variation of orange. Now I get a better separation. And again, I can click and drag to modify the gradient in some way, drag it a little bit further so it's not the same color. Now we can see the separation between this tree's layer and this tree. Then I'll go to the next level. Again, just repeat the process, taking your time to get the colors that you are looking for. So I'm going to look to grab this darker orange. With the gradient, I can click and drag to adjust the color. I'm going to drop this one a little bit lighter. Then move on to the next layer. For the color, if I do want to darken it up, if I move the K up a little bit, I get this darker variation. K represents black, CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and key or black. But again, clicking on the gradient tool, I can adjust the gradient. I can see that this yellow-orange color is just not dark enough, so I'm going to bring up the M on this so it is darker. Once I have that layer, go to the next. With this dark red, I'm going to push this K up a little bit. Again, just getting a little bit more darker. Just so we're getting separation from the layer that's in front of it, or on the outside of it. So that gives me good depth up to the mansion. This last color I'm going to separate it even more so. Rather than just keeping it all to this red-orange color hue, I'm going to actually end up putting it to more of a purple color. But clicking off the gradient, just so we get some darker variations, I'm going to pull in some cyan to make it a little bit more bluish. I can eliminate a color if I don't want it, but right now it's a little bit too dark. I'm going to drop down my yellow so it brings in more purple, and my K to get a little bit lighter variation. And I can always redraw the gradient several times until you're satisfied, until you find that color that you're looking for. But this darker purple definitely gives me better separation from all the reds and the colors as it comes out further. But now that I have these color variations, I'm going to look to reselect out all the layers. And I'm going to apply that drop shadow that we hid previously. So now when I see it, I should be getting the separation a lot better on each piece. It all comes together a lot better. Once we have these gradient effects now applying onto the objects, we want to get into what could be considered the more complicated or most complicated part of this. It's adding in highlights, elements that are going to make the piece of paper look like it's on the outside edges. To do this, again, I am going to hide these gradients just so they don't get over complicated. But again, hiding out the drop shadow for a moment, I'm going to select on my tree layer, my first outside tree layer. If I want to give the sense that this is not just a flat piece of paper, that this does have an edge that is receiving some type of light source, maybe coming from the top left, I want to get into adding in edges of the paper so it creates a little bit of highlight. To do this, what I'm going to do is double click on this single shape. When I double click, it goes into what is known as isolation mode. With this isolation mode, we're going to make a copy, or hit Command C to make a copy. But understand that if I just hit Control or Command or Control C, only click on it once, it's only selecting the outside piece. You can see that it has technically a layer mask. So I'm going to hit Control Z, undo, and I'm going to click and drag from over the entire piece. That way it selects out all the elements that make up this singular shape. Now when I hit Command or Control C, it selects out everything. I'm going to hit Command or Control F, which is paste to front. With paste to front, it puts a copy directly over the area that we want to be working with. To really understand and grasp this, I'm going to change this color so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to make it just a bright yellow so that it's easily identifiable and easily different from the piece that's behind it. You see if I move it over out of the way, it's just slightly different or additional copy from the original. If I always want to move it back, I can hit Command or Control Z. But once I make this one single copy, I'm going to look to make another copy. Command or Control C, Command Control F, and this time I'm going to make this piece white. The reason why I have now two copies sitting on top of the original, I don't want to affect the original. I want to be able to create highlights that are going to separate from the top left side of each of these pieces. What I'm going to do is tap a few times up and to the left with this white piece. And then I'm going to look to select out both the yellow piece, hold down Shift, and select on the white piece. This gives me an overlapping area where it leaves a little rim that is not actually overlapping. To make sense of this, I'm going to now click on the Shape Builder tool. And with the Shape Builder tool, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, ALT on a Windows computer or Option on a Mac. But holding down Alt or Option, I'm going to look to eliminate out the main portions on the bottom right side and the main area. So anything that is white, I want to keep. Anything that is appearing as yellow, I want to get rid of. So holding down Alt or Option, eliminating out the yellow areas. Now with these white areas, now that I have them all there, I'm going to look to hit again Command or Control C, making a copy. And then I'm going to hit backspace and exit out of my isolation mode. To exit out of my isolation mode, I can click on either the top left arrow where it says back one level, or I can double click on the outside of this layer. And the reason why I did the Command or Control C before is because now when I do Command F, it pastes that highlight into the top right side of this single layer. So you can now see the separation, all this white area that makes up this shape. With this white area, I'm going to change it to a light orange color. And there are a couple of little yellow areas that I've missed or accidentally selected. When I click on them, I can easily hit backspace. So clicking on that piece eliminates out the yellow. But now with these white pieces, I'm going to change it to a lighter variation of orange. So when I click on it, the idea is that it leaves this little rim, this little highlight on the edge of these shapes. The one area that I don't want to keep is this top left side, because this is going to be where the drop shadow from my outside exterior piece is going to be. I'm going to take this piece out. But I'm looking to have all the pieces that sit on the interior, on the edge of this lighter yellow. You can see around the area, goes all the way around the rim over on the right side, and then through the tree limbs here. To really grasp a better understanding of this, I'm going to repeat the same process for the next level. I'm going to select on this light orange, double click on the piece. With it selected, remember we have to select out over the entire piece. I'm going to click and drag with the selection tool, so it selects out all the pieces of that layer. Hit Command or Control C. Do Control or Command F, pasting to front. And with this copy, again, I'm going to make this yellow. Again, I'm going to make another copy. Command or Control F. And again, I'm going to make this white. Then I'm going to adjust the placement up and to the left. Select on both the yellow piece, hold down Shift, select on the white piece. And again, I'm going to click on the shape builder, hold down Alt or Option to eliminate out the top or the bottom right, eliminating out the yellow areas. And this does take some getting used to, being able to separate out and understand what layers are being eliminated. But the reason why the white is staying, the yellow is leaving, is the white represents the highlighted areas. This yellow area is being considered what is the shadowed areas. Which, if you want to get more advanced variations of this paper cutout, yes, you could absolutely keep the yellow in certain ways. But right now, this is more of a distraction than anything. So if I mess up in any way, if I miss a piece, remember, before I do eliminate this out, I can also eliminate this top left side here. But before I do get out of isolation mode, I want to hit Command or Control C, making a copy. I can hit backspace, and then I'm going to exit out of the area. Now I'm going to hit Control or Command F. You see the white areas that create out the highlights for this section. This time I'm going to pick out a lighter orange. Make sure you're on the selection tool when getting into coloring this areas out. If it messes up in any way, I can still see I have some yellow pieces I have to take out. Then I can select on the white pieces and again pick out the lighter orange color. Be careful if the layer is appearing in front of your other layer that's supposed to be on top of it. I can hit Command left bracket to drop the layer backwards. Make sure you're out of isolation mode for this to work. But what I was particularly looking at is this bottom left side. I'm not seeing the highlight over top. So once I have the highlight for that layer, I move on to the next layer. I'm going to double click, go into isolation mode, select on, remember, the whole piece. I'm going to use the selection tool, click and drag over everything, just so it gets the inside circle and the outside circle. I'm going to hit Command or Control C, Command or Control F, change this to yellow, Control F again, change this one to white. I'm going to adjust this up and to the left. I hit up and to the left probably twice to the left and twice up. Hold down Shift to select that both. I'm going to click on the shape builder, hold down Alt or Option. And I'm leaving just this single white piece over on the inside right. I can hit Command or Control C, backspace, get out of isolation mode, Command F. I'm going to pick out a lighter variation of orange to make this color. Just make sure that you're on the selection tool so you can change the color. If you're on the shape builder at all, it's not going to work or not going to appear. But I want to hit Command left bracket to drop this down behind my tree that it's supposed to be behind. You might have to tap it several times to make sure it's in the right location. I'm going to darken this up just a little bit. Select on the color. Just so it's a separate, different orange than the orange that's next to it on the tree. Do this for the next piece. Select on the interior orange, double click on it. Remember, click and drag over the whole thing. Command or Control C, Command or Control F, change it to yellow, Command F again, this time changing it to white. Hold down Shift to select on both the yellow and the white, and then use the shape builder to eliminate out the areas of yellow and the overlapping sections of white. So it leaves me just this red rim, or this white rim around the outside edge. Command C, copying it. Backspace, get out of that mode, and get out of isolation mode. And again, Command or Control F, paste that area in. Again, I'm going to pick out a darker orange, or an orange color. Just use the shape builder to make sure it's that color. Or make sure to get out of the shape builder so you can change that color. But again, I just want to move this behind the part of the tree. I can hold down Command or Control and then tap left bracket or hold down left bracket until it goes behind the tree area. So I know this is a tedious process, but take your time. You will get the hang of it. It just takes some getting used to. I'm going to move on to the next layer. Double click on the piece. Again, I'm going to click and drag over the whole thing. Command or Control C. Command or Control F. Make it yellow. Control F again. Make it white. Up. To the left. And up. Selecting out both, I'm going to use the shape builder to cut the areas out. Hold down Alt or Option. Can get very tricky on the window area. Just take your time, zoom in. I take a very close look. Working from a lot closer allows me to get all the correct selections that I need. Leaving us these white areas that are going to be the highlights for the shape. No, not every area does work. If I'm taking a look at like the ball on top of the mansion, those don't line up. It leaves a weird wonky area. But now with these white areas, I'm gonna hit Command C, backspace, get out of isolation mode, click off of my shape builder on with the selection tool. Again, out of isolation mode, Command F. These white pieces I'm going to change to a lighter red. And again, I want to hold down Command or Control, then use the left bracket, hold down left bracket until these go behind my tree. I can also do this with the moon. I haven't put a drop shadow on the moon just yet, but if I don't want to have this just a flat white color, I can darken it up or put some variations of color on it. I'm going to do a white to blue just to show some separation. Just so it gives some tint of color. Keeping it very minimal, but now that I have this, if I wanted to create a highlight, double click on the piece, Command Control C, Command F, make it yellow, Command F again, make it white. Up to the left, select on the yellow, select on the white, then use the shape builder to cut out the areas of yellow and the overlapping sections. Now I can use this white that I have. I'm going to hit Command C, backspace, get out of isolation mode, Command F. And I'm going to nudge this down a little bit to the left so everything lines exactly where I want. But again, it's sitting in front of the house right now. I have to hold down Command left bracket to adjust the location. Now that's behind my house. Now it appears as if it's casting in the distance. But once I have all these elements of highlights, now I can look to get into putting my drop shadows back in. Putting my drop shadows back in. I already have a number of drop shadows. Remember, we already have the drop shadows on the main pieces. I'm going to look to select out those main sections. I can select on the outside gray, hold down Shift, select on the orange. Select on each of the layers inward, holding down Shift. Then I can go over to my appearance panel and review my drop shadow. Understand that if you happen to have had another layer selected, one that didn't have a drop shadow, let's say for the highlights of my tree, you might get what is known as a mixed appearance, which can be confusing, but it's not going to permit you to be able to modify or reveal your drop shadow. So understand you have to be specific in the selections that you make. I can reveal my drop shadow. Takes a second for it to load sometimes. Then I'm going to also add a drop shadow onto my moon. I go up to Effects, Illustrator Effects, Stylized Drop Shadow. Keep the same settings. For the final elements that we can consider getting into, if I wanted to add in other features, I'm going to have this bat image. I can hit Command Shift right bracket, bring it to the front. I'm going to use the eyedropper to match to the gradient that I have for my gray exterior background. I can always modify the gradient, but I am going to have to apply the drop shadow again. These are going to be more floating pieces that can be added on, so they don't have to have the same exact features, or they don't have to be connected automatically. If I wanted to use one of these pumpkins, the reason why I have these couple separations of pumpkins, first I want to raise this up, Command Shift right bracket, bring in front. What I'm actually going to do is create this tile kind of book effect. I can use a gradient that I previously used from another part of the oranges for my gradient for my pumpkin. I'm going to select on the two pieces that make up this scary face. And again, just match the color of the gradient. You see that they're actually two separate pieces. One is going to be for the left side, one is going to be for the right, but I need to raise this up on top of my other piece of the pumpkin. I'm going to line it up to make it look as part of the scene, but I'm actually going to scale it inward, tightening it up, so I'm going to create what looks like kind of paper folding from a book. And this will help create some layers or give the sense that paper is stacked on top of other paper. But with these, I'm going to put the drop shadow on all three of these pieces. And go back up to Effects, Stylize Drop Shadow. There is a weird area of drop shadow that I have to be aware of, and the weird gradient that happens on top of these objects. With the gradient, I can click and drag to modify the gradient if I want it darker on the inside and lighter on the outside. But if I want this drop shadow that's casting over this piece to go backwards, I'm going to hit Command or Control left bracket. You see that I now adjust it to behind this piece. But I also may not want it on this piece. If I wanted to cover up this drop shadow, what I would do is create a duplicate of this piece, Command C, or Command or Control C, Command F. I'm going to eliminate out the drop shadow on this piece, and then raise this piece upward, hitting Command right bracket. So that little adjustment helps to create the sense that this is kind of a stacked piece of paper. I can adjust the gradient if I want to make it a little bit darker. But rather than having that piece that casts over, this technically sits over top of the area. And we can do the same idea of highlights on these features as well. But you can see that we're now building a real composition with all these different separate pieces. The final element that I would want to consider doing, you can see how the highlights were created for the bat and the pumpkin on these two pieces. So that same process, if I wanted to do it, again, select on the bat, double click isolation mode, select on it, Command C, Command F. I'm going to make this hide the drop shadow, make this yellow, Command C, Command F, making now white. Adjusting the placement, I can select on the yellow piece, be careful not to select on the background gray. But with the shape builder, holding down Alt, I can eliminate out the pieces that overlap, all the pieces of the yellow, leaving the white. With these white pieces, Command C, backspace, click out of isolation mode, then I can hit Command F, paste them back in, And I'll change this to a lighter variation of gray, just so it becomes a highlight on top of the edge of my bat. That way it helps to separate from the background. Again, if I'm doing the same idea for the pumpkin, I may again want to eliminate out the drop shadow for a moment. Zooming in, selecting out both the yellow and the white, and using the shape builder to cut out the overlapping sections as well as the yellow sections. If I mess up, I can always hit Command Z, undo, or Control Z to undo. But with these white areas selected, and get out of isolation mode, I'm going to put my drop shadow back in, and Command F. Take these highlights and I'll go with a lighter orange color to give the highlights that are on now my pumpkin. The final element is adding in what is a texture, just to make this more paper-like. To add in this texture, I've already downloaded from my computer. I'm going to go up to File, Place, go into my downloads and choose out the texture and place in the texture. The texture is quite large, so I'm going to reduce it down, but I'm ultimately just looking to scale it to fit to the page. And get into distorting the size. But with this texture, I'm going to go over to my transparency panel. Transparency panel looks like two overlapping circles, the top one being transparent or opaque. And I'm going to change my normal blend mode into either multiply or color burn. Multiply leaves a little bit of gray area, which works well for a Halloween type of theme. Opacity wise, you may want to reduce that down so it's a little bit more visible on the design. Or I can change this to color burn. With color burn, it brings out more color itself. I think overall works better for a vibrant type of image. But now that we have this design, I hope you enjoyed Paper Cutout. This is the beginning demonstration, and I'll do a couple of demonstrations to help you understand the progress further. I hope you enjoyed.